Hello everyone. Um, I've been meaning to make a series of videos on different asset classes, how they will perform in future. Today I'm starting with residential real estate um, and basically how or what could potentially be the causes that may help increase in house prices. Um, or what could be the reasons why the prices will decline. Um, and I'm strictly talking about residential real estate here. I'm not talking about commercial or farmland. So let's get started. The uh, first cause that may hinder the increase in prices would be rising interest rates. So um, and why would the interest rates rise? And that primarily because if people don't trust uh, giving their money to government, i.e., bonds, then the interest, the price of those bonds would go down and the yield on those bonds will go up. In other words, people don't trust that government is solid enough to pay them back their principals. So there is high risk, and hence uh, only way for them to give their money back to the government would be, or not back actually, to the government would be uh, if the yields are high. So if the yields are high, that means interest rates are rising. Um, and uh, and that would be a big headwind for the house prices. Reason is because if the interest rates are rising, that means uh, if wages are not able to keep up with that rising interest rates, then less people, that means, can afford the houses at current price. It means uh, to make the houses affordable or reachable uh, for the public, the the prices will have to go down if yields are rising. So uh, this also closely ties with bank lending, um, but we will discuss that separately because there could be scenarios where temporarily uh, bank lending can be independent of interest rates. So yeah, that's going to be one of the major cause in future. And as most of you know, interest rates are near rock bottom across the world, um, historically speaking. Uh, can they go down? Yes, absolutely. If they go down further, then that is going to be a tailwind in for the prices, but it is going to be very temporary, in my opinion. Um, um, and if governments uh, or the respective reserve banks of the countries will try to keep the interest rates lower. And by lower, I mean they're already near about zero. Yeah, they will have to take into the negative territory. Uh, then, then it will be very difficult to maintain at that level because um, inflation is going to be extremely high. They will not be able to maintain those negative interest rates uh, without making the stuff available. I mean, just printing money and keeping the interest rates low is one thing, but in order for public to avail those interest rates, things have to be available. And if things are not available, then they're going to be two type of markets. One is which is fictionally maintained by the governments and the reserve banks. And then there will be the real market, which will actually define the actual interest rates. And that may not just be limited to house prices interest rate, it would be for everything, the bond market and others, which are all closely related. So yeah, that's going to be main cause going forward. Next one will be the wealth tax, and this is basically government gets desperate because their revenues are they're already loaded up to their gills in the debt. And if revenue streams reduce because of economic downturn, um, or because of rising interest rates, their debt burden is increasing even further. The governments will get desperate and they will try to go after the um, population which is wealthy. Um, so they will say, hey, you know what, you are wealthy, you're not paying your fair share of taxes. So we're going to put 5%, 10%, whatever tax on you. And these are basically the rich people um, who have multiple millions or even multiple hundreds of millions. Um, so yeah, that's going to affect the real estate in the sense that if a lot of the wealth of these individuals is into, let's say, real estate assets, they will have to sell it, and on the margin, it may uh, cause decline in the prices. Uh, and it all depends on, like, what level of taxes government is going to push, or if the or the bracket of population uh, that it is going to be imposed on is can actually pony up that money through other mechanisms, without selling their real estate. Uh, so, in other words, this may become a problem, and it may not just be related to just simple outright wealth tax. It may be related to when old people or old generation dies and they uh, are forced to not transfer their wealth regardless of the asset class, and they cannot transfer it, so they will just have to sell it and pay the tax on it, whatever government impose. So in other words, if they say, hey, 50% wealth tax if you want to do a generational transfer, then sell half your assets, and that could be real estate, that could be other asset classes. So regardless of that, that may cause a problem as far as prices go. More so, it will be affecting the high net worth individuals. I Depending on how desperate governments get, it, the probability of this sort of tax being imposed on um, people with wealth around million, maybe 2 million, is less likely. Uh, but again, it depends on how desperate these governments actually become. Next one is capital gains tax. This one, I feel, this is not exactly wealth tax. This is, just, people like you and me, people who are not very rich. They may have their only residential property, possibly, and one more investment property. And if for a period of time, because of high inflation, the properties uh, uh, gain some value, um, or they may not even have to gain a lot of value because of inflation. This tax may be imposed just because of the increase in value over last 5, 6, 10 years. And again, for the same very reason, if governments are not getting their revenues, these sort of taxes may be imposed on um, somebody who doesn't have a lot of wealth. Um, and because and if let's say if it is imposed on people who even with who have just their residential home, it may it will be very controversial, and people, I personally feel, will actually there will be a lot of pushback. But again, it all depends on how the revenues of the states and the governments is is actually affected. Um, One thing I would like to point out here is that a lot of revenue do come from these back and forth selling, home flipping, house flipping, and you know that, and property taxes, and those sort of basically real estate. Um, so there is a potential, if that revenue reduces for any reason, or the total debt increases for the governments, there is a chance that these sort of taxes will play a role. And if such taxes, if let's say capital gains tax is imposed, then it becomes really bad situation for housing. Reason being, houses are very illiquid. You if a capital gains tax is imposed, let's say you don't have any other assets to pay for that tax, the only option left for you is to sell your house. And in such a scenario, it becomes like a waterfall event for the house prices. So nothing, not a good scenario at all. So yeah, moving on. Next one is high property taxes. Um, this one is very interesting. Um, this I feel is going to happen regardless, and this is even if none of the above happens. This one I think is just simply baked in the cake. The debt levels are extremely high, and you know as I foresee, the interest rates will going to be rising in future. They cannot keep them any much lower. I mean, they're already near zero. And if they are rising, that means the interest rates on existing debt are going to rise. That means they would need more revenue to pay off that debt, or at least try to maintain the uh, same level and just to pay off the interest on that debt. So and if there are no additional revenues coming, they will be desperate to increase those revenues, and one of the source would be property taxes. Uh, just to give an example, I think state of Victoria in Australia um, has total of 26 billion, maybe 23 billion in revenues per year. Um, through state income, they do get federal grants as well, which is much higher, but I'm not going to go into that. But let's talk about the state income. That of that 23 or 26 billion, I think if I'm not mistaken, around 11 billion comes through some sort of a property or real estate taxes. So it's a major chunk. So there is a very high likelihood that property taxes will be increased, and that makes the housing very unaffordable. So if your wages are not able to keep up with the times, the property, the people will not be able to afford the property. They would rather prefer rental than actually purchasing new properties, and thus the properties um, prices will decline, uh, and potentially even if the increase in property taxes is significant enough, people will be forced to sell their properties to and go to the um, uh, you know living in a rental property. Um, on the flip side, if for some lucky reason um, property taxes are not increased and they are lower, that is definitely an incentive um, to to buy a house. It will be easy to maintain. You don't have to pay a lot to um, just pay the government to maintain it. And yeah. Next one is high unemployment. This ties up with others or property taxes as well. So if you don't have job, you cannot afford to pay the property taxes or even maintain your house. You end up selling, hence a decline in prices. Um, and that the high unemployment may happen because of economic downturn or increase in interest rates, because if there are interest rate increase, then all these Ponzi companies that have their existence dependent on this uh, debt model and lower interest rates will basically go kaput very soon. That means all those people will lose their jobs. That means if they have houses or mortgages to pay, they will not be able to afford it. They will have to sell, and that may create a vicious cycle in property prices decline. Next one is less bank lending. This one is tied up with interest rates, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video. Um, Bank lending is basically if banks feel that people have jobs, they can afford the houses, they are willing to lend the money. But if interest rates are high, people cannot afford it, then property prices will have to decline to actually meet the monthly payments on the mortgages. Um, Now, this one temporarily can become independent of interest rates. Say, for example, there is just a temporary shock, let's say, because of decline in stock market. Everybody's scared, and interest rates will decline, but so will the bank lending because there is a scare in the market. So they won't be as keen on giving away the money, and temporarily um, that may actually uh, stop the bank lending, and hence if there is not enough bank lending, people are not taking mortgages to purchase new houses. So either if everybody is existing, if assuming if everybody who has a mortgage continues to have job, and they are able to afford those mortgages, then that's fine. It may not affect the housing prices in that scenario, but more than likely, if there is a scare, as I explained, all these companies that are dependent on cheap money will go bust. People will lose their jobs, high unemployment. They'll have to sell their houses, and so on and so forth. So in a less bank lending scenario, um, on not only if banks are lending less, if people losing jobs, they are selling their houses. In such a scenario, it will be again and sort of a event where prices will decline, have to decline. This may be short term, because if you know there is a shock to the market, and then the reserve banks and the government say, hey, you know what, yeah, this is not sustainable, we'll have to go back to the zero interest rates or a negative interest rates policy. Then credit spigots will be open, and back to the unicorn world where free money being distributed for mortgages and stuff, and house prices you know start rising again. So that is one of the scenario where there may be a temporary decline. um, yeah. Moving on, next one is this one is again related to inventory, existing inventory of the houses. It may be applicable to some places, may not be applicable to all the places. China is one of the prime examples. They got tons of empty houses. For them, that is going to be a big headwind, because movement, like what is happening there right now, construction and real estate space is going through a downturn, Evergrande scenario where companies are going bust and defaulting. The high inventory suddenly, because prices start reducing, people panic, and and those empty houses which have been kept, even though they are not occupied and there is no income coming from those houses, people are just keeping them for because of the rising prices. And once that scenario reverts, that high inventory becomes a headwind in itself. People start want to try to get rid of those houses because prices are declining. They don't know how far they will go down, so let's start selling them. And that in itself, that psychology becomes vicious in itself, and cause decline in prices. If there are not many inventories in certain locations, anywhere in the world, then this may not be a scenario that is applicable. But this also again plays with other, circumstances, whether even though they may not be high inventory in certain location, but if the debts are high and the wages are declining or people are losing jobs, there could be other scenarios that may come in play. This I'm specifically mentioning it here for the places where the inventories are high, and it it is in my feeling across the board high because of the cheap interest rates, and everybody had that same China mentality that if prices are increasing, let's have these holiday homes or shares, holiday shares, uh, you know as a piggy bank, because the prices are increasing. Even if I have to keep it empty, it doesn't matter. So that is another reason that may be major reason in future um, that may affect the house prices. Last but not the least, this one actually happened. This may I haven't put it in either or category, but I just want to touch on it. Um, is windfall tax, and the only reason I'm bringing it up is because this is something that has been implemented or going to be implemented in state of Victoria in Australia. And what this is if government makes a decision around a property or piece of land around their zoning. Let's say if it was rural and now you can develop it as residential, or if it was residential, now you can develop it as commercial, then there could be significant increase in prices of that property. Um, and and that is they consider it as windfall because of a decision that the government is making. And in that scenario, you will have to pay extremely high taxes. So let's say 50% or 70% of that increase in the value, you will just have to simply pay back as tax. So this one doesn't have any. I wouldn't say this is either a headwind or a tailwind, because definitely if prices are increasing, it's good for the person who owns the property. Uh, Although majority of those windfall revenues or windfall will go back to the government, it is positive. However, where it may become a tailwind is around the rules how this law is implemented. And what I mean by that is, let's say if you get a windfall and now you are liable to pay government, let's say 70% of that windfall, let's say, or 50% or whatever, 30%, doesn't matter. um, how do you pay it if the law says that you have to pay it only when you actually get rid of the property? Then it may be okay because you can live through that. If you that's the only asset you have and you can live for 25 years on that property or however long you want, and then only you have to pay back to the government, then it's acceptable, or it may be acceptable. But if you have to pay them immediately and you don't have any other asset to pay back through, then you're screwed. Basically, you have to return your property or sell your property, and that may be a challenge. Again, same issue comes in play. You may be able to sell it, but if you will be happy selling it, or being an illiquid asset, how much really you will be able to gain. Let's say if government you have to pay government 70% of the windfall, uh, then the and and the buyer knows that you are in a pinch, you have to sell it, then you might not even gain that remaining 30%. He or she might squeeze even more out of you. So yeah, I mean, this one is interesting though, because it's not really related to house prices increase or decrease, but something to keep in mind. So yeah, all these scenarios may happen. Some have high probability, some have less. Um, Rising interest rate, in my opinion, is a very high likelihood going in future. So is the property taxes and capital gains and wealth tax. I think they are very likely. So is the high unemployment. so is less bank lending, and so is high inventory. I think all of them are very high likelihood. To what extent, what are the probabilities of all of them happening? We'll just have to see. Um, but one thing in the end I would like to share here is, if you do have a residential real estate, let's say outside of city, and you uh, don't need to go or drive to work every day in the city. Um, you just, even if you have to drive, it's say even it's just close by, um, and you can be independent in terms of your energy consumption by putting solar panels and those sort of things. Have your own water supply. Um, you can use part of your land for, say, growing some stuff, and can be independent in as much as possible. Then it's definitely worth having such a real estate going forward. It will make an individual really resilient for the times to come. Thanks for listening. I would like to hear your thoughts on this video. Please post them in comments, or post links, or if you disagree with anything I said, or if you agree with anything I said, please share your comments. And thanks for listening again, and I'll see you next time. Bye.